I will say welcome to our panelists and to our attendees. There are currently 10 attendees. Hopefully there'll be more. There are 46 people registered for today's event, so congratulations. I am Olivia Morris from Metronet, and I am hosting this, we
Can't hear you.
Our first ever panel was academic librarians, and we had some of the bigger schools, and we thought it might be interesting to hear from some librarians who work at slightly smaller schools. So that is why. Oh, apparently you guys couldn't hear me. Sorry about that.
No, we missed your whole introduction.
Yeah.
All of it? Oh my goodness, I'll have to start all over then. I don't know what is going on here. My internet is just wonky at the moment. It's like going up and down while I'm watching. It's crazy. So I apologize that you couldn't hear me. I will say, welcome. This is Small Academic Libraries. We are here to hear the wonderful librarians. I'll cut it a little shorter. And I will say that to our attendees, please, if you have questions, hit up the chat or the Q&A feature and let us know. We are here to answer questions for you. We will be asking some. I have some prepared in advance, but we want to know what you are curious about and what you would like to know from these fine people. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen there and let you see everyone. And I will begin. So the first question is, please introduce yourself. Tell us what is your current job title and where do you work? Then give a description of your school and where it fits in the Minnesota library or academic landscape. All right. And Marcus, I'm going to let you go first.
Okay, so my name's Marcus Serafine. I am the head librarian at Dunwoody College of Technology in Minneapolis. We are a private nonprofit institution. We have an enrollment of about 1,200 students each semester. We have a focus on hands-on education, and we have all types of programs. Some are could be a 6-month certificate program, all the way up to a 4-year bachelor. So we're a little bit of a mix of everything. Did I cover all the points? Sorry.
Tell us about Dunwoody. Is it part of any of the bigger systems or?
We're part of as far as the library, we're part of MinPals, but other than that, we're just a private school on our own as an island, so.
Perfect. Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, no problem.
And Krista.
Hey, my name is Krista Jacobson. I'm a public services librarian at Northwestern Health Sciences University. There are a lot of different Northwesterns in the Twin Cities. I even just learned about a new one the other day because one of my coworkers got a job there. But we are not the Bible College. We're not the homeopathic school. We are a school that is dedicated to kind of complementary and alternative medicine type programs. So we have massage therapy, we have acupuncture, we have chiropractic, we have nutrition. We just added some new allied health programs, including rad tech, medical laboratory. And then one of our other programs that we have is a undergrad program that sometimes, helps people who are in our other programs finish their bachelor's degrees. But there's also a system in place so people interested in going to medical school who may have graduated a few years ago or may have gotten liberal arts types degrees and they want to beef up their sciences like organic chemistry and other types of sciences so they can apply to med school, physical therapy school, occupation, all these different other medical professions. They can come and they can do their post-bac pre-health. So they can get, it's an accelerated program that prepares them to start applying to those other types, the schools for other professions. We are a small school. We're located in Bloomington. We are just over about 1,000 students, and we're located in an old junior high school. So it's kind of interesting. You walk through the halls, there are lockers everywhere, and then you get to the library, which is part of the extension, and it's really beautiful, I think. And then where do we fit into the school? Well, we're part of Minitex, obviously. But that's about it. We are the consortiums we have, our partners are mainly other chiropractic schools. And so right now, we don't associate with any other university or any other school in the area to sort of, work as a consortium, essentially.
Terrific, Krista.
Hi.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
they.
And James.
James Nalen. I'm a librarian at Century College, which is a 2-year community and technical college in White Bear Lake. Actually, it's half in White Bear Lake and half in Matamidi, which also seems to be part of St. Paul. I don't know. It's very confusing to me where we are. We have about, I think our head count from last year is something like 12,000 students. And as a first year equivalent, it's close to 6,000 students. So lots of part-time students there. As I said, it's community and technical college, so probably half, I don't know, half the students are doing associate's degrees in the liberal arts, anywhere from business to English or whatever, and they're transferring on to a 4-year school. And then there's another half of the students who are doing more technical type programs like dental hygiene or cosmetology, auto body repair. There's kind of a whole wide range of technical programs that we offer too. We're a Minnesota State institution, and we belong to the MinPals Consortium. I think that's the only place we belong. We work, with OCLC and stuff, but that's just, we pay for that. So.
Great. Thank you so much. Next, I would like you all to tell us about yourselves. Where did you go to school? And give us an overview of the path that you took to get to where you are today. And James, I'm going to stick with you.
All right. Well, I've had a kind of a checkered past, I guess, in libraries. I got my MLS from Simmons College, which is now Simmons University in Boston, back in 1996. And since that time, I've spent probably half my career in public libraries, and the other half in academic libraries. And I've started in Massachusetts, where I'm from, and spent a while there in a public library, and then went to Ohio for an academic library. And then I moved to DC, and I was in academic library there. Then to Wisconsin, I was in a public library, and now I'm back at an academic. So, and somewhere in there, I was 6 months at a special library, but I didn't like that. So, so yeah, I've kind of been around and done a whole bunch of different stuff. Lots of reference and instruction. Public library director, and now I do more acquisitions into library loan. Type of stuff. I just still do some reference and instruction. Yeah, that's about it.
That's a pretty colorful past, James.
Yes, checkered. I like checkered back.
And Krista.
So I originally went to school in Madison and Stevens Point. I'm from Stevens Point, Wisconsin. And, to undergrad in Madison, then I went to Stevens Point to get my education degree. And then I went to France and I taught English there for about a half a year, about a year. It's not essentially a year, yeah. And then I came back to Illinois and I taught French in a high school. Kind of realized that I didn't love teaching high school students as much as my roommate loved teaching her high school students. So I decided, well, I'm going to kind of move to Minneapolis, which is where my sister and my best friend lived. And I came here and I thought, do I want to teach? What do I want to do? Because my parents are teachers. So I kind of felt like it was probably in my blood, or shall I say. And then there's all these requirements to become a teacher in Minnesota. So I wanted to take a year, just kind of think about, do I want to keep going to school to get those, credentials? So I started working at just a kind of a small company near where James works right now in Bananas Heights. And I really liked that it was 8 to 4:30 period. Like I didn't have to go home and plan for the next day's classes. I didn't have to grade anything at the end of the day. So I ended up working there for about 3 years. While I was working there, I kind of thought, it was always kind of like, seemed like the place I worked was sort of paycheck to paycheck. Not me, but the the business. I thought, well, what happens if this business goes under? Like, do I want to go to another private business, or do I want to go back into education? Because I do feel like my passion is education. And I said, well, I think I want to do education. And I just started thinking that libraries seemed like a really good fit. I did not do it the proper way. I mean, I think a lot of people had some library experience before going into library school. I did not. I just kind of went, libraries, that's what I'm going to do. So I went into St. Kate's master's degree program and worked while I got my master's degree in libraries. And then right as the last academic crisis hit in 2008, that finally I finished my program. Then the business that I was working at did go under. I was out of work for a couple of months, and then I knew somebody who lived in North Dakota, and she was a librarian in North Dakota, and she was moving to a different library. And she just kind of recommended me to the people who were in charge of the school. And I ended up getting that job it's actually in Moorhead. And so I lived in Fargo for a couple of years. It's a small academic library, so I kind of did everything. And then I applied for the job in Bloomington at Northwestern Health Sciences University. And I ended up there, which at first I thought was really exciting because I thought, I get to specialize a little bit more. Turns out I'm not doing everything I did when I was in Moorhead, but I'm still doing a lot of different things. So I do the reference, I do the teaching, I do the interlibrary loan, I manage the paraprofessional and student staff. So I do have a variety of different tasks, just not always the same variety that where I initially started out, but it was a good experience to have to do everything like cataloging and putting the stickers and processing out the books. And I do some collection development, but it's not my primary job duty. So that's it.
Thank you so much. And Marcus.
Well, it sounds like Krista, you and I have a lot of similarities in what we did. I also started out as an educator. During my undergraduate, I was going for English education. And just by chance, I never thought, but as a student worker, I ended up working in the campus library. And I did that for 4 years while I was getting my education degree. And I did really like it, but I still librarianship wasn't really something I thought would be long-term. Although some of the librarians did put it in my head, and I'm still in touch with some of them, and they're kind of my mentors now. But after I graduated, I continued to work in libraries and substitute teach in Wisconsin for about a year. And then from there, I went and taught English in South Korea for a few years. So I did that, and that was kind of a great experience, like I'm sure you had in France. Really helped me become a better educator and just kind of broaden my horizons a lot and think about what it was that I really wanted to do. And I was still in touch with all of the librarians I knew in Wisconsin at the time, and they were always encouraging me to come back and go to grad school. So eventually that's what I did. After leaving Korea, I came back and I went to UW Milwaukee to go through their master's program. I did not pick a specialization while I was there. That's a question that I get from people a lot. I just went through the program. That was an option at the time. So I was working in libraries there and substitute teaching a little bit. After I graduated, I was working at Chippewa Valley Technical College in Eau Claire, if anybody's familiar with that. It's only about a 90-minute drive from where we are now. I really liked it. I did, as I was going through library school, it did help me realize I really did like being a teacher, but I liked working with older people, and that was something else that working at the technical college really helped me. At the time, I kind of had split duties. I was working both at the technical college and UW Eau Claire. So I got to have the experience of working with mostly 18-year-old undergrads fresh out of high school, and then people who were most likely coming back from a second career or a few years away from education and things like that. And I just found I really liked working with that older crowd, or just, they had a wider range of experiences and things like that. And something about it I really enjoyed. So my initial intentions were that I wanted to be an academic librarian. I really like to focus on reference and instruction just because that's where a lot of my background was with teaching, and I felt there were just a lot of good parallels there. So I worked at Chippewa Valley Technical College, and I was sure that I was going to stay in higher education for the rest of my career, just for a lot of the reasons I just mentioned. But then I had a unique opportunity. I saw a job posting to be a middle school librarian in Hawaii, and that sounded very fun to me. And they wanted someone who had the MLIS and a teaching background, and they were very clear in the job posting. It was only for 2 years while their normal librarian was working on a special project. So although I said I was going to stay in higher ed, that sounded like a really unique opportunity for me. So I spent 2 years being a school librarian in Hawaii. So I did that. And then from there, I'm originally from the Twin Cities. So I saw this job posting and it just looked like a great opportunity for me. I hadn't lived in the Twin Cities since I was a teenager. And it would get me back into the higher ed world that I liked a little bit more. So that's how I ended up at Dunwoody College of Technology. And this was a big change for me because I had always worked at bigger institutions, both UW Eau Claire and Chippewa Valley Technical College. Chippewa Valley Technical College, they're much bigger than us. Dunwoody, we have about 1,200 students, which is smaller than my high school. So it's been a big change for me to be working in a smaller library too. But that's how I ended up here. It wasn't exactly what I had planned. You know, I thought I'd be a high school teacher somewhere. And I also thought my main goal was I just wanted to be a reference librarian at a bigger college. But now I've been here for a few years, so we'll get into it more with our questions coming up, but I do enjoy working at the smaller school where I'm at. So that's a little bit about my background and how I ended up where I am now.
Thanks, Marcus. You all have very geographically diverse backgrounds, I will say. It's really interesting to hear. So next question is, pretend that you're speaking with someone who has never heard of libraries before, and now describe your job. Krista.
That's a good question, because I feel like that people who have heard of libraries still sometimes don't quite understand what we do in libraries, especially academic and special. I think a lot of people, go to their public library and maybe understand what goes on there. So my job is mainly, I don't read all day, unfortunately. What we do is we try to connect students to information. And so that can be, help them, find information and analyze information and try to find good resources and sort of work against their internal biases that we all sort of have. I think sometimes we will read things and we sometimes will if we agree with it, we don't necessarily probe things further or look deeper to see where they're getting their information. And so that's what I encourage my students to do, is to kind of probe and look deeper, to analyze information and to kind of double check what they read, even in just daily life, but also even with academic or highly scholarly publications. And I basically will help students navigate databases to find that information for their projects or for their own personal research needs. I can get full text for them, not just through our databases, but through Interlibrary Loan, and kind of encourage the students to kind of use that, Interlibrary Loan. I teach on copyright. I teach faculty on, I create tutorials that they can use in their classes. I will go and teach in their classrooms, and now we do that virtually and trying to find ways of getting into classrooms. I mean, sometimes we're invited in, sometimes a lot of it is working with faculty and be like, that thing you complain about students not doing or not understanding, I can help you. I can give you tools for students to use to improve their research skills and improve what they use to cite on their papers. So I guess that's kind of what I do.
That's terrific. Thank you. Marcus.
Wow. First of all, I think you gave a really good description, so I'm going to try and follow it up, but you said a lot of basically what is on my mind, I feel like.
I'm like, Olivia, thank you so much. You gave me the hardest question to start with. So.
Yeah, I would say my biggest thing is connecting students to resources and information, and that it comes in just so many different formats than what somebody would associate with the library. Like you were saying, there's so much, well, you just have a book or a newspaper. It's no, we have so much more than that. So it's connecting students to the right to not only to information, but then helping them understand why this is the information they should be seeking out and able to hopefully trying to help them analyze and process it compared to other resources or information that might be out there. And then just helping them be successful whenever their career path is. I tell this to students all the time. I'm not an expert in most of our programs. I don't have an engineering background. I don't have an HVAC background. I don't have an auto background. So we're going to have to work together, but I can help you find the things that you need. So yeah, it's helping students connect to the right resources. And then it really is more teaching than I think people realize. And maybe that's something I fall back on just as a former teacher or educator. I have those tools in my toolkit. So that's what I would lean towards too as well.
Wonderful. James.
Well, I guess my technical title is acquisitions librarian. So I guess I would say I buy stuff, lots of stuff, whether it's ebooks or books, databases, journal subscriptions. And then I work with other people to try to make that stuff accessible and easy to find. Now that's difficult to do. And sometimes you're sort of doing it for one sort of customer in mind, or who you picture the average user is. And so what happens is that I then spend a lot of time either teaching people how to access that stuff and make use of it, or help resolve problems, trying to get at it. But yeah, I think it's pretty similar to Krista and Marcus. We're really in the business of bringing lots of stuff together, whether it's our own stuff or getting it from some other library and making it accessible that way. But the teaching is a huge part of it, or just trying to get people connected to the right set of stuff. It's pretty difficult sometimes.
Honestly, sometimes it's also, troubleshooting printing issues or, Word document issues. And I think that's another aspect that is part of the day-to-day that people don't really realize. But I find, I think sometimes libraries tend to be, when students don't know where to go, they come to the library. If they have questions on their FAFSA, they come to us. And I'm like, well, I can't help you with that, but I can tell you where to go. So I find sometimes that that's another thing that I've encountered is I feel like we're triaging a bunch of issues that people have, from questions with a bookstore because they mistake bookstore for the library, from student aid, or they need help with tutoring, or they have questions on math, and I've helped with math before. I actually had to teach math before. I forgot to mention that. I was kind of thrown in at my old Olivia, where Olivia and I used to work, and they just said, we need a math teacher, go teach math. Like, okay. That is unusual, by the way, to say that.
That is unusual, Krista, but that happened to me too. I was thrown in to teach a criminal justice course like my first week.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. It might have been a hallmark of the school itself.
Yeah. At least I can say that I could talk to my mom. My mom's a math teacher. So I used to be like, oh, well, now we've all taught math, because her mom also taught math, even though she had an English degree. So it's kind of like, they're like, okay, that's a family trait. And then about halfway through that course, I'm like, okay, I got a new job. Nice seeing you though. It was great though. I love the students. They loved me. I was like, okay.
I agree with that for sure. Okay. So for each of you, when you first began your library career, what path did you set out to follow? Did you want to be an academic librarian or a public librarian or special librarian, whatever it was? And why did you choose that particular path? Then, do you think you would have still ended up where you are today if you had chosen a different path? Okay. James.
Well, I think the path I wanted when I was in library school was I had done the archives management specialty or subspecialty, whatever. And then the other classes I focused on were all more academic library type things. So I definitely had an idea of either going into archives within an academic institution or an academic library itself. And my first job out of library school was at a public library. So I was quickly off track. Now, it was a very large public library. We had there were probably 600 staff, and of that, probably 180 librarians. So it was a very unusual public library. It's, one of the largest in the country. And I think that was fine to get off track that way and get exposed to lots of different types of stuff. It just wasn't what I was thinking. And then 4 years into that, I thought, I wanted to go into an academic library. What am I doing? So then I did make the switch to an academic library. So I guess the second part of the question is, would I do things differently? Is that what it was? Or
Basically, yes.
I don't think I would have. I'm surprised I've ended up where I am sometimes. I think probably what I had in mind was that I would get into a good sized academic library and become either specialized in some aspect of that library there, or work my way up the food chain into management or something. But the place I'm at now, in my career is kind of interesting because I kind of use little bits and pieces from all the different places I've been, whether it's management type stuff or budgeting or tech services or public services. It's all kind of thrown in, and I get to do a little piece of all of that. So, community college is kind of interesting for me because it takes that academic library background and public library background and kind of sticks it together. And that's really what a community college, that's kind of what we do. It's very similar to those two types of libraries. So.
Great. Did you ever work in an archives?
No.
Never.
Oh, I did a couple of internships, but I've never. I don't think I've even set foot in one since library school. So.
And
there are archives, but not for me.
We got a question in the Q&A. Will you all just quickly say where you went to library school again? Someone missed it.
Oh, I went to Simmons College, which is now Simmons University in Boston.
Marcus?
University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee.
And Krista?
St. Kate's. University of St. Catherine now, I guess. Yeah. And St. Paul.
Great. Thank you all so much. And let's go to Marcus.
Okay. First, I have to apologize. Sorry, I am on campus and a student knocked on my door, so that's why I disappeared there for a minute. Sorry, I forgot to mute. So similar, I think I mentioned it in my last answer a little bit, but no. And James, you really hit the nail on the head. Your plan was my same plan when I finished library school. I kind of got my foot in the door in the University of Wisconsin library system, and I thought that's what I was going to do, and I was excited. I wanted to kind of work my, hopefully one day be a reference and instruction librarian and stay in that system and just kind of learn all about that system and find a place for me and, maybe rise up somehow, or maybe just, like I said, my ideal job was just to be a reference and instruction person who would go into classes and spend my time doing research with students or faculty. But it didn't really work out that way. And I remember I mentioned earlier, I saw this job posting for a job in Hawaii, and it seemed like I checked a lot of the boxes. And I talked to one of my library mentors, and I was like, what do you think? Should I, I felt like I had a good job where I was, and, it was safe and it was somewhat secure, and, nothing is, but at the time I thought it was. And, I was hoping, do I stay here where, this seems like more of a sure, safe thing, or should I, take this other opportunity that's really only going to be for 2 years, while I'm filling in for some medical. And thankfully, I'm so glad I listened to that person's advice. They said, go get as many experiences as you can in diverse places, work in different library systems and things like that. And I'm so glad that I did. So really, I think that helped me grow as a library professional. I never thought I would work at a smaller institution like this. Like I said, I started out in just bigger schools and that were part of a bigger system. And that was always kind of my goal. But then after I was able to move around and have a few different jobs, and really it was just eye-opening for me to see how different every library and library system is, and realize that, there are pros and cons to all of them. And sometimes you might be a better fit in one particular library or even just a system as a whole. So I'm not sure if I hadn't taken some of those chances, I probably wouldn't have ended up where I am right now. And I'm glad that I had some opportunities to kind of work in a variety of different library settings, systems, locations, things like that.
Terrific. Thank you. And Krista.
So I always did, when I went to school, I knew I wanted to be an academic librarian. I did consider media specialist, but when I looked at, I was thinking post-graduation and where I would work. And if you took the media specialist route, I kind of felt like schools were that's where you go. You had to do schools, high school, middle school, and things like that. Whereas if you did, because at St. Kate's was kind of divided, there's a media specialist track and the librarian tract. And the librarian tract and the media specialist tract didn't really intersect all that much. And so if I did the library tract, that gave me the option of public libraries. It gave me the option of special libraries. It gave me the option of academic libraries. And I think deep down, I knew I was more into academic librarianship than perhaps high school or middle school librarianship. Although, if they were combined together, then I would have done all three of them together. So I went to academic libraries. I did an internship for Rasmussen. And so it was kind of an online internship, which was nice and kind of gave me that experience in that realm. And then I went, after I graduated, like I said, a lot of things just kind of happened. Like I actually had just gotten a promotion at work where after I graduated. So if that company hadn't gone under, would I still be there? Maybe. If I didn't have, I actually got 2 job offers on the same day. One was to go to Fargo and work there. And the other was to be an office manager, which was kind of what I was doing while I was in grad school in the Twin Cities area. And I really didn't want to leave the Twin Cities. And so it was kind of a moment where I had to think, okay, do I take the location or do I go, I went to grad school, do I start that career? And I made the choice that, okay, I'm going to move, I'm going to go to Fargo and see what happens. And so obviously and I also, when I was in school, I worked special libraries. The Special Libraries Association, the student group, was a very active group. I mean, it was the most active group at St. Kate's. So I was very much involved with SLA for a long time. And who knows, if the circumstances had worked out, I might have ended up in a special library. So would I've ended up in the same place if I had gone a different route in school? I mean, obviously, if I'd done this media specialist, who knows where I would have been? Maybe I'd be in a school right now, which would be nice. I mean, I do miss my summers off, but that's probably I do think I'd be somewhere in the library world. Sorry for the gibberish, but that's kind of where I think it's hard to know, but like you said, like you saw that thing, you decided to apply for the Hawaii job and you just kind of see where it went, and you did. It was a good experience, and that's kind of how I kind of see my role. Just random experiences, random things happen that you make a choice and you choose one path or the other. Had I chosen to stay in the Twin Cities area, who knows where I would be? Maybe I'd be high up in that company, or maybe I'd be, starting somewhere else as a library, in a library.
You're right, Krista. It's almost impossible to know because we can't go back and play it out in a different way. But I think it's just interesting to see, to reflect on what those choices mean. And I think it gives a really good perspective. One of the things that James said was how everything that he's learned at each job that he's had all comes to bear in the library job that he has now. And I think that's a really important point that both you and Marcus echoed in different ways, just to know that it's all valuable experience, no matter where you work. So.
Mm-hmm. And like I got, you took the job that you get, and that's where I worked, where we actually, Olivia and I both worked at different campuses. And it's what taught me, like, oh, I kind of like working with, like James mentioned, I kind of like, and Marcus mentioned, I like working with this population that is not necessarily, either has been out of school for a while, or wasn't necessarily shown like how to search for in databases, or it's comfortable to them. So I found that they're very open. A lot of those students are very open to, our help, which is always kind of nice. And that's something I learned, based on the job that I took. So after that, experience, I knew smaller libraries, I think I kind of preferred. I never really envisioned myself necessarily going to like a major university. But then again, who knows? The right job opened up, maybe I would end up at, the University of Minnesota or something like that. But I do like smaller libraries.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about basics in the library world. So tell me a little about minimum qualifications and starting salary to do your job or a similar job in your library. Okay. And Krista, I'll let you start.
Minimum qualifications for my job is a Master's of Library and Information Science degree. Some schools and some places don't even require the master's degree, they require experience, but for the most part in academic libraries, it's a requirement. As for starting salary, that's, I don't really know, to be
Ballpark
honest.
is fine if you have an idea of the ballpark.
Yeah. I can talk about, when in Fargo, it was close to like about 35, 40,000. It was pretty low, I thought. And so I would say that's probably, I'd say maybe 40,000 is kind of like 35 to 45,000 might be starting range. It might be more. And I just happen to, start at places that I find that there's a big, massive range in salary. I think I've heard people who've been offered jobs, like former colleagues who've been offered jobs at some private schools for like $32,000 a year, which isn't crazy to me. And that was, I'll say it's about 10 years ago. That's another thing too. It's like when it was, that's probably 10 years ago. And then I've heard people, like I look at like the community college, the Min-State, I think salaries are posted as part of a bargaining agreement, and maybe James can, talk about that. But so I think that's my guess, maybe around that amount. But like I said, it's been so long since I've been an incoming librarian, and I don't hire people and make them offers. So
that's okay. Thank you. Yeah. And Marcus.
So at our institution, so the minimum requirement is the MLIS, which I have. And then when I first started, we had basically like a paraprofessional. They didn't have a background in libraries. But when they left us, I was able to fight to get a second MLIS position added at our institution. So that was great. And their starting was around 50,000-ish. So somewhere around there. And when I was in Wisconsin, I think that was the similar. So not to be like the head person, but to be, if you were a new academic librarian in Wisconsin, it was 50 to 55 as well. And having the MLIS.
Great, thank you. And James?
Well, we're a union environment, like Krista alluded to. So this is on the web somewhere in our contract, but if I'm reading the contract right, if you come in, you have to have an MLS to be a librarian. And if you come in just with the MLS without any kind of other experience or any other degrees other than your bachelor's degree, I think you come in at 47,000. And then if you come in with a second master's degree, education, whatever it is, you would come in at a much, much higher salary. So it's all kind of in the union contract, and there are these columns, and your combination of experience and education puts you in different columns and then steps within those columns. So, but 47,000, I think, is the basic if you were just got your master's degree in library science, no experience doing that kind of work. That's where you would come in. Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we'd all love to know, are you the only librarian at your school, or how big is the library staff, including any paraprofessionals that you may have? And are the job duties collaborative, or do you particularly have an area of specialization? Marcus.
So I kind of alluded to it in my last answer. When I started, there was only the one position that was one librarian MLIS person and one paraprofessional, and then student workers. And now we are up to 2 librarians, and student workers basically are what we have to cover. I wish that's been one of my biggest adjustments, and some days I love it and some days I love it a little less, is that I miss my specialization. In some of my previous jobs, like I said, I just really like reference and instruction. And I felt like I could put so much more of my time and energy into that. And we do little bits of specialization, but really both of us just kind of have to share it. And, I tried to, like I said, when I hired somebody new, to find somebody with different experiences or interests than me, so we could divvy it up a little bit. But really it is about being a jack of all trades, where we have to do, sometimes we're working the front desk and, helping answer reference questions or doing circulation. Other days it is acquisitions, collection development, cataloging. They built us an archive, which was very nice. So we have a new library with an archive space. So kind of figuring out what to do with that. James, I'm sure you have some tips for us. But yeah, it really is just doing a little bit of everything. And like I said, some days that's great. And some days I'm always learning new things. I feel like I'm a much more complete librarian after working in a small location like this for several years now.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks so much. And James.
Well, we have 4 FTE librarians. There are actually 5 of us, but 2 of those people are part-time librarians, I guess. And then we have 5 AFSCME staff that are mostly full-time or nearly full-time, like 38 hours a week. So it's a fairly good size staff. And let's see, we do, and then we have a couple of student workers sometimes when they show up. We haven't had good luck with student workers. And right now we don't have any in the pandemic. We do specialize somewhat. We have somebody who focuses on e-resources and OER, or open educational resources. We have somebody who focuses on cataloging and public services, basically the circulation desk. And then I do acquisitions and interlibrary loan. And then the 2 more part-time people do reference and instruction. But having said that, we all do aspects of all those other jobs. So I also do reference and instruction. I get into electronic resources, really tied very closely with acquisitions. It's hard to kind of disentangle them. So we're always in each other's business. I do a little bit of cataloging. I probably shouldn't, but I do. And I have to muck around with the circulation desk schedule too, or, do some training for those people. But so there's some specialization, but we do a lot of getting into each other's business, I think.
Great. And Krista.
So we're kind of specialized and there's some overlap. So our school we have almost 4 FTE. We have the library director, our technical services librarian, and me are all full-time. And then we have a serials and archivist who's about 0.75. Then we have approximately, maybe 2 FTE of paraprofessionals, and we actually have about 4 people working that position, although only again showing up, which is nice. So I think I would say that my job is the one that spills over the most, because I think I have more public facing responsibilities. So I'm in charge of supervising the paraprofessional staff. I supervise the student staff. If I'm not there and somebody else is going in, I need to make sure. So for instance, I also supervise the chat reference that we have going on. And if I'm not going to be, for this right now, I said, I had to send out an email and say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to take the chat shift because I am doing this panel. And you guys don't want to hear, that's when we would get a chat references during this panel. On campus, if I'm in a meeting or I'm not around, other librarians would need to step in to sort of kind of back me up in my role to help students, find resources. they're mostly encouraged to try to make an appointment with me, but every once in a while somebody has a question right then and there about a database or about how to find full text. And so everybody kind of has to know the basic public service duties that they have, that I do, just in case I'm not around. Whereas for a technical services librarian, if something doesn't get cataloged for a week, something's not cataloged for a week. You know, for the most part, it's not going to be a big deal. The archivist, the same thing. If something, archives can kind of wait if she's not around. And then I have a little bit of overlap with like the collection the technical services librarian, because she does collection development. And so I will kind of tell her, oh yeah, this book needs to be put on reserve because it's a textbook, or this book needs to be put back on the regular shelves. Again, the serious librarian, because I also do electronic resources. So we kind of have to work together a little bit to kind of make sure that the resources are working and available in our journal finder. But for the most part, we're kind of specialized.
Okay, thank you. So speaking of being specialized, the next question is there a specialized skill set that's needed for your job outside of what we would consider typical library skills? And if so, did you have it before getting your job, or did you learn it on the job? And is it associated with any special degrees or licensures or certifications? So let's start with Marcus.
As far as a specific technical skill, not really, but what I would say the biggest thing, and it goes back to where we don't have specializations, flexibility is a huge skill that I need for this job, flexibility and patience. And I will say I thought I was a little flexible and patient before I started here, but now this really has, really developed those skills for me. So yeah, as far as an actual technical skill outside of library school, not so much. Other than that, personally, James, I'm like you. I am doing cataloging, and I probably shouldn't be. I wish I had taken maybe one or two more of those classes. But here, it's just really being in such a small organization, but that we also work with the entire campus, where I just have to wear a lot of different hats, and it depends on the day. And it's a lot about being flexible, prioritizing, like, we were just mentioning, Krista, some things, yeah, they need to be done right now, and other things, yeah, we can wait a day or two or a week until this person comes in or until this is done. And those have been the biggest skills that have helped me. So yeah, not necessarily beyond what I learned in library school. No, I wish I had, done a little bit more focus in some of the technical aspects of library school, but it's just really learning how to prioritize, be flexible, and be patient, because yeah, it's just wearing a lot of different hats, and you never know what's going to come through the door on any given day, from a faculty member or a student, and that might change a little bit of the direction when you thought you were going to get to focus on collection development that day, but then it turns out, there was this project assigned in a class, and now you have 20 students emailing you and coming into the library, and you can't just tell them, I'll get back to you in a week, but maybe the collection development can wait even though it's bothering me, or the cataloging can wait even though it's bothering me.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marcus. Krista.
So I think some of the skills that I would recommend, or that I needed, is the library where I work is considered a health sciences library, which is almost bordering on a special library. And I did not take any, I don't even know if I took a database searching class when I was in school. I can't remember. It's so long ago. But there's a lot of health sciences lingo that I didn't understand, about research, about like systematic reviews. I don't know if that, I know that wasn't covered in my program. I don't know if it's covered, if it's uncovered since, but like randomized controlled trials and how to mesh terms, which is medical subject headings. So I understood controlled vocabulary, but I didn't study mesh specifically, which is the controlled vocabulary for medical searching. So that is all new. And then a lot of times I think Marcus mentioned something I'm not an HVAC expert or an engineering expert. And that's the same thing with me. I'll have students come in and say, I need, some studies that prove blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, I know, it's some kind of technique that they use in like chiropractic adjusting or in acupuncture. And the tough thing about the programs that we teach is that it's not as so a lot of money will go to making pharmaceutical studies, and not as much money will go into the professions studying the professions that we teach at our school. So they sometimes have a hard time finding, studies on this specific topic related to the technique they want to employ. And sometimes it would help me to do better searching to understand what each technique really is about. Like, what does it do? Because sometimes something they do in like chiropractic, for instance, is also something that's done in osteopathic medicine or in physical therapy. And you just need to use the different search terms to actually find that, if I knew what exactly the mechanisms and of the technique were, I could maybe find other studies done in different professions. So that was a big learning curve when I started working here, is just studying, learning all about this medical sciences and searching medical sciences and specific databases that I didn't actually look at that all that often, because the students in my other previous school didn't study PubMed. That wasn't the database they used the most often. But I like it. I mean, I like the very specific, I can't talk today, the very specific topics that we have to study. And so it's not super generalized or super broad. It's very particular to this, these types of databases and publications. Another thing I think also that you just gotta learn, like, especially with instruction technology, be willing to play with different ways of getting information out there. Tutorials, suddenly you have to develop tutorials and you might have to learn Camtasia, or you might have to learn, some other type of system, Adobe or Articulate, or, and then you start to do it, and it takes a lot of practice to develop something nice, or to find other types of software that come out that you might discover and realize, what, I want to try doing this. And so I started doing video tutorials. I didn't like them. I feel, especially now during the pandemic, a lot of students are kind of videoed out. So I started working on doing things with Genially and other types of software that's available. So that's one thing that they don't teach you, especially with reference and instruction, is, by the way, you're going to have to learn some new system almost every year, because something new will be coming out, or your school is going to decide, hey, we're going to do, we're going to do TextMath Relay. And then suddenly at the beginning of the pandemic, they switched to Panopto. So, yeah.
Great, Krista. Thank you. James?
Yeah, I guess piggyback on that. There was no way back in 1996 that I was learning things in library school that would even be wanting to be using now. Just being willing to learn all these new products and services and stuff. I mean, it's something new all the time, and you get used to, using something like Camtasia, and then your school decides, oh, we're not going to renew Camtasia. We're going with something better. And then you have to learn that thing and redesign your stuff. So that, I think in library school, learning just to be flexible and learning, kind of how products work generally, getting a general sense of what they do that you can then apply to anything that comes along. Same with database searching. I mean, you learn maybe some database in library school, and then 10 years later it's gone, but you apply those same principles, controlled vocabulary and truncation and all that kind of stuff. But the only thing I think that probably I never really learned in library school, and maybe there was a course on it, was more, we had a management course, but it was more about managing people. And I never really learned about budgeting and things like that. And that, it's hard to get training on that unless you're doing it, right? So you got to find somebody who's not paying attention enough to let you do that and get some experience working on budgets and playing around with numbers and stuff. But because I do a lot of stuff with budgeting now, and certainly when I was a public library director. As far as certification in the profession, there isn't much. Some systems that we use, the system that Marcus, I assume that you're using, is Alma, right? That's our ILS. And you can get certified in Alma, and I probably should be given the stuff that I do, but I haven't got around to it. So vendors will offer some certification programs, and I don't know if other ones do, like, I don't know, III, or if they have certification, they probably do. I'm not really aware of any other certification stuff in the profession. I think there's some kind of public library certification that happens. I know in Wisconsin there was at the state level, but there's really nothing for us. We're just out there. They assume you've got the MLS and you're good to go. So,
I mean, I should say in medical libraries, there is something called the AHIP, which is a specialization in medical librarianship that you can do, and it's through the Medical Library Association, and it's involves a bunch of different things like taking webinars and continuing education, and then presenting. You get certain points, and so you just can keep going up and get this classification called AHIP. So there are things like that. I have a certification. I have a copyright law certificate, basically some training saying you went through this course and you have some knowledge in copyright law and copyright and digital licensing, negotiating digital licensing. So I've done things like that. So there are things out there that you can get certified. I mean, it's not like kind of a certification that you necessarily require or need, although AHIP, I think, is something that is required by some, especially hospital libraries or some academic libraries for med schools. And then I wanted to say also one thing that I don't know if you guys learned this in school, like the basics of like interlibrary loan. I had no clue how to process an interlibrary loan before I started working in a library, or and through OCLC, and I use DocLine as well, or the rules related to Cantu and interlibrary loan. Those were certainly not talked about. I had to basically start from the beginning and like, okay, so what is this rule of, I don't even know if I did it perfectly all the time. What is this rule of 5? What is the rule of 2? These were not things that were covered, those kind of nitty gritty types of things that are so essential to being a librarian, but aren't things that are covered because it's more theoretical for the most part. At least that was my experience. I don't know what your experience was in school.
No, that's a really good point. And this is something I alluded to way in the beginning, where I worked in one library system, for the first few years of my career. And I just assumed, well, this is how every library system does it. And now I've worked in libraries in 3 different states, and interlibrary alone is just the biggest one. Is every library, every state did it a little bit differently. And when, that was just one of my questions. They're like, oh, well, this is just how we do it here. And I was like, oh, well, it's, as somebody who's just a newcomer to a new system, to a new state, they're pretty different. And, you had to walk through the steps and things like that. So yeah, that's just one example. That's a really good point, Krista, of just how things can vary. And it is just kind of theoretical in a lot of ways. And just sometimes it feels somebody made a rule 30 years ago and it worked. So now we're still doing it 30 years ago, but every organization, every state, every system could do it differently than what you're used to in some ways.
Well, the person I took over through interlibrary loan definitely had she would send out invoices on like three ply paper. She'd write, and this was in 2013 when I started this job. So we're not talking like 1990. She would write out invoices, like write them out on 3 ply paper, and then like rip them apart and had one to accounting and one to send one off to the person, and then keep one of her files. And when I got there, I was like, yeah, we're not doing this. We're gonna go switch to at least a mock-up, invoice through our system. We can do that in Word. So that's something that's like, want to change that. I mean, and I don't know that she, her rules and her interpretation of Cantu is a little different from mine. And then another thing you'll find too is you'll see in job applications like must be experienced in Alma. Well, not everybody has Alma. Like I've worked in WorldShare. I worked in, what was the old one in Minnesota, and we use something called TLC. So yeah. That's another thing too, is like, okay, well, I don't know, like, yeah, the OPEC we have is very different than what the ILS is very different than from job to job.
Yeah, that's every library I've worked in has had a different one. Polaris, Alma, trying to think of the other one, but yeah, everywhere it's just, it takes time to go and learn all of those, so certifications or whatever. And it's as you're learning it, realizing that, oh, the next time I switch jobs or in 2 or 3 years, this is just going to be completely different anyways. So getting as familiar as you can without driving yourself taking up all of your time trying to figure out all the intricacies of every new piece of technology.
So this is Anne. Krista, can you tell us in 2 sentences what Contu is? No, don't know if everybody knows.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Like
What?
me, who has never done interlibrary loan.
I know, and I just realized who I'm talking to, and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, I didn't know what Contu was when I started. I've been working for 5 years, so I don't know the acronym, but basically, the Contu are the general guidelines related to sharing an interlibrary loan. So basically, there are a couple rules. We have copyright rules, and then they developed these sort of guidelines. So it's gonna be more than 2 sentences, and I'm sorry, but a couple guidelines on what about sharing, and so. There are a couple of rules, like the rule of 5 is that you can, as a requester, you can request in a calendar year, and maybe James will tell me differently because he might have a different interpretation and he might set me straight, because but you can request 5 articles from a specific journal published within the past 5 years. And so the whole philosophy is that if you start requesting, you can't go request like 100 articles through interlibrary loan from the past 5 years, because if that's the case, you're using interlibrary loan to basically replace buying a subscription. So they kind of came up with some guidelines so you're not in that position. Or in the rule of 2 is basically one person can request 1 article from a specific issue. If they request a second article, they recommend you actually paying copyright fees on that article, or getting a subscription to that journal. And so these are some guidelines, and there's some controversy around the guidelines. I mean, this isn't law. It's just sort of kind of an understood way of doing interlibrary loan. And so those are not things, again, that are ever talked about. And when you start doing interlibrary loan, suddenly you have to learn about it yourself. And James, maybe you want to add to that too, or?
Yeah, no, I think your interpretation's right. Interlibrary loan is a kind of a rarefied world out there that you have to know a little bit about copyright and Contu, and but in the back of your mind, you're thinking, is anybody ever going to come after me for violating any of this? I don't know, but I suppose you're supposed to do things the right way.
Well, if we're ever looking for you, James, we'll look in interlibrary loan
Yeah.
jail. Thanks. So I there's so many acronyms in library science, libraries in general, including the question Lynn has, which is, what is Alma?
Yes, I was just going to hit that. So I know, let's go with James. James, tell us what Alma is.
Yeah, Alma's a product from ProQuest, Ex Libris, whichever of those companies owns the other one. I think ProQuest is the owner, right? They bought Ex Libris. Alma is the kind of the back end, what library staff and librarians use to do acquisitions, to place orders for materials, to process the books when they come in, and do the cataloging. There's interlibrary loan piece of it. So it's sort of that back end part of the library. They also make a product called Primo. And Primo, for most libraries using Alma, is what we would call now the discovery layer, the discovery piece. So it's the public-facing part. It's the library's catalog. That Primo is the name of that product. So there's Alma, back end, Primo, front end.
And just most of us in the MinPals system, we switched over to this a year or 2 ago. So that's why we all know that we're familiar. I think we're all MinPals organizations. So we switched, so that's why we're all familiar with it. I started using it in Wisconsin and just got the first introduction to it. And then I moved to a state where they used Polaris, which was a different type of system. And then I came back here right at the tail end before we started Alma. What were we using before? Aleph, yeah. So I got to have about a year using Aleph where they learned this, but we're also getting rid of this soon. So that was a fun experience.
And MinPals is the consortium of the Minnesota state colleges, universities, as well as some additional members like Dunwoody and Northwestern and various and sundry others. The state agent, some of the state agency libraries are members of MinPals, so it provides access to various collections across the state. And that's a membership organization. You pay to belong and pay for its services.
Yep.
Just for those who don't know.
Yeah, and we aren't part of MinPals.
Oh, you're
so-
not part of MinPals, sorry.
But, no, that's okay, totally okay. I mean, Northwestern, the biblical college might be, I don't know, but we are.
The other, exactly, I think you're right there. Why
Yeah.
is everything called Northwestern? We're not
I know,
even
but it's
really Northwestern if you look at the map, but anyway, thank you for the correction.
No problem. Well, I'm glad you guys took Alma because I would just say, it's an integrated library system. That would have been my explanation.
Yes, they explained that very well. All right, let's talk about a typical day. And I know that nobody's living their typical life right now. And we're going to talk about the pandemic in a little bit. So for now, think back to when you did have a typical day and you went into the office. What was that like? What do you do with your time? How do you fill your time at work? All right, James.
Well, I don't think there's anything regular for me anyway. I mean, probably like anybody, I think, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z today, and that hardly ever happens. But I mean, there's some things that I have to do. I have to take a look at interlibrary loan and take a look at any kind of lending requests that are stuck or borrowing requests that need to get approved and sent out there or need further investigation. So there's some regular stuff that it directly impacts our customers and they're waiting on things. But when I looked at this question, I thought, okay, I'm just going to write down what my day was today. So I started my day looking for OER textbooks. These are open educational resource textbooks for a nursing faculty member who's on sabbatical and wants to use a different textbook when she comes back. So that took me quite a while to find find things that might work for her. I did I did the budget projections for our fiscal year 2022 budget, which was very sad because they're cutting our budget, so we have to cut something. And then I did some ILL, and we had our weekly meeting with my colleagues where I tried to corral them about the budget. That didn't work. I fixed some order records. That's my acquisition stuff. I imported order records from our vendor. And then I was thinking about this presentation. So I think I did something else in there, but it may have been lunch. But,
Thanks,
so
James.
just
That's a busy day.
all over the place. Yeah, it's just crazy. All over different stuff.
Krista.
So this was kind of an interesting day because I had a lot of stuff going on today, which is good because other times I will have a lot of time to work. I mean, I think that's all in academic libraries, there's kind of a mixture of scheduled things, and then you have time to do, create those projects and try to get those done, like those tutorials. So in general, I am always checking email to see if there's a reference question coming in or a, interlibrary loan request coming in. I do the main kind of email account. I will have meetings. I think today we had a faculty meeting, so that was a presentation I attended. I'm on a lot of committees because the library is kind of small, and we also have flexibility in our schedule as we don't, I will have classes scheduled, but for the most part, nobody else teaches any classes, and the classes and sessions that I have aren't necessarily, they're not ongoing. It's like a one-off here and one-off there, or I'll do a workshop here and I'll schedule a workshop there. So we have a lot of flexibility to join academic committees at school. And so one of the committees I'm on is the University Curriculum Committee. So tomorrow we have a meeting, and so I had to go through a bunch of classes and courses that were submitted that either course changes or were changes to a program. And I have to go through, we kind of give recommendations to the people submitting it. And then once they, change their suggestions, they will move on to the faculty senate. I have a reference interview, 2 reference interviews today, one to help kind of writing questions and how to get started, and another just trying to help her find resources for an assignment she has due. So there is no, I mean, and then like when I was at school, it was, you know, we had student workers at the front desk, but I'd have to take over the front desk if a student didn't show up, or I would, you know, answer questions just that may come up that other people didn't know the answer to, because I've been there for a while, so I have institutional knowledge that not all our student workers will have. And then, yeah, I'll process interlibrary loans. I will work on projects. It's just answer reference questions. Maybe I'm stuck in meetings all day, or, you know, teaching. So there is no typical day. I'll just say that.
Thanks, Krista. Marcus.
Again, Krista, I feel like we have similar positions in a lot of ways. I was trying to think when I saw this question, again, pre-pandemic, what would I be doing today if it was January 27th? At the beginning of semesters, this is when we do a lot of our one-shot, when I am going into the classrooms and doing either, we have something called freshman seminar courses, which everybody has to do, a 1-credit class, kind of an introduction to the library, you know, what we do, why we're here, those kinds of things. Or with some of the other classes, it's how to do a research paper. And then with some of the more advanced classes, how to do these more, like I'm learning a lot about architecture and engineering, like what do you need to do research for architecture or engineering projects? I'm learning all about blueprints and schematics and things I've never looked at before in my life. So that would be, this time of year is a lot of that. The first, from now until about the middle of February is when I do the most of my reference and instruction classes. And then throughout the rest of the semester, it'll depend a little bit. Like I said, some of our 4th year students, then I'll go back into those classes 2, maybe 3, or even 4 times throughout the semester to kind of help them, you know, guide them as they're going through a project with their instructors. Also, because it's both the beginning of the new year, that means we're looking forward to our next budget year. So working on the budget for the upcoming school year, but also it's the end of the month. So then for me, I have to go through the rest of the staff, which is a small staff for us, but any purchases and things that they made throughout the last month to approve those and make sure our budget is up and ready to go by the end of the month here when everybody has to submit. But beyond that, then always on a typical day, like what you said about emails, is always having to have the email open because that's attached to me, whether it's a reference question or interlibrary loan or something like that, responding to people as much as we can. Outside of those things, then it just depends. Also committees, right now I'm on a committee next semester. So in the fall, we're starting our first ever fully online distance learning classes. So that's something new for our institution. So I'm on a committee helping to make sure that that'll be up and ready and running for those students. It could be a committee though about course reviews, about adding a new field of study or just a class or a component to one of our certificate programs. And then it can just vary day by day. Sometimes it's working on collection development, seeing what we have. Sometimes it's working on LibGuides or working to create the videos or other things that we're trying to use to reach out to our students. Sometimes it's the bigger long-term projects like our archiving or trying to get caught up with our cataloging and things like that. So the typical day, there is no typical day, but all of that said, I miss those so much and I can't wait. Hopefully in the fall, we can come back and have most of our students here to get back to the more craziness that we're used to.
I will say of all the people that I've spoken to on these panels so 30 of you, I don't think anyone has ever said they have a typical day in a library. I just don't think that's a thing. Maybe I should rephrase that question to take advantage of that. All right, this is one of my favorite questions. What is the best thing about your job and what is the worst thing about your job? Marcus.
The best thing I will say, so working at a smaller private school, not attached to a larger system, is I really do have a lot of freedom in what I want to do and the bigger projects that I want to tackle. When I worked for the different state college systems, it seemed like just to get anything going, it's okay to do this. If you really want to start this project, let's get a committee, let's do this, let's go through, this process, have this person approve it. And here, we just I get to work on it. I get to tackle it. I can't ask them for more money, but, I have a lot of freedom in the larger projects that we do and the overarching goals I have for the library and our programs that we do run. So I do like that compared to other places where I've worked. I feel like there's a little less bureaucracy or red tape, whatever you want to call it, just in having freedom for guiding where we're going. And then was the other thing, what do I like the least amount?
Yes.
The other thing is, like I said, it's just, I do have to spend all these nitty gritty details in areas that I'm not used to. So it's been a little bit of a struggle where we're just really, really with two of us, I do have some grand plans. And so, yeah, we do have the flexibility to do that, but how do you do these things and keep basic things running with only two people, and then student workers who come and go. And if they show up, they might be here this week, but this semester, and they say, oh, I'm going to have this job for 4 years, but oh, it turns out, they'd rather go do something else in the spring or something like that. So the best is that I do have the freedom really to do a lot of what I want to do and, have a broader vision than I feel like I've had at other positions that I've been. The downside is it's really hard to juggle all of it with two people and get to focus on the things you love. And some days I spend just the parts of librarianship I don't like. I like being the front facing person, but I spend more time staring at spreadsheets or cataloging in the back than I've had to do at other positions too. So.
Excellent. James.
Well, I have two things I like and one thing I don't like. I mean, I have more than one thing I don't like, but one I'll talk about. So the things I like that I get to work with a lot of data and to make decisions based on that data. The nice thing about ILSs these days is they usually come with some kind of tool. So for example, Alma comes with an analytics tool. I can't even remember what it's called now. Maybe it's called Alma Analytics. Marcus, is that right? And you can pull out so much data out of the system related to how people are using different types of resources or the cost of those things or all kinds of things, and then make actual decisions on that. And lots of other ILSs have these kind of side tools to them now too. So you don't necessarily have to be a Excel wizard, and Excel certainly has some limitations to it when you're working with data. So I like that. And I also really like working with the nursing faculty and students, which is most of the teaching that I do is related to nursing. So those are I think of those as our power students and our power faculty. They're the ones that are doing more kind of interesting research and have the most interesting and challenging questions. They're not, can you find pro and con and the death penalty type questions, which really sink me. They're doing things that are much more interesting. So those are the two things I really like. The thing I don't like is Netflix. I know, it's crazy. No, I like it. Well, I don't really watch it personally, but it's video. Video is crazy. Century faculty really like video, and that's probably true at other institutions too. It's the way that they think that to deliver certain aspects of the content of the course, they want to do that via video. And because they're all consumers of video themselves, they're usually watching Netflix and thinking, oh, why doesn't the library have this documentary? I'd love to show this in my class. And they say, can you buy it? And I say, no, I cannot buy it because I can't get a Netflix account for the library. So the video is like the Wild West. It's so crazy. We have 4 streaming services, none of which include Netflix content. Just as a sidebar, Netflix does have some films that they'll let, they say is okay to show in a classroom. You have to go to the Netflix site and kind of search around on there, and they'll say, yeah, you can do this in the class, but most of their stuff you can't. It's a violation of a license agreement that the faculty, if they're trying to use their own account, they'd be in violation of. So we have lots of other things, but we don't have Netflix content. It's terrible. Hate
That
it.
was a great answer. I feel like that was one of my all-time favorite answers to what is your least favorite part of your job? Netflix. That was and well explained. Thank you, Krista.
So I'm going to apologize. You may have seen me go off camera. I realized, oh, it's getting dark. I should turn on some lights. And then I'm not an expert in video. So suddenly all the lights, they have a blaring light there and a blaring light there. So hopefully maybe the lighting situation will fix itself. But if I'm turning the camera on and off, that's probably what I'm doing, trying to not have weird lights appearing all over. My favorite part is, I guess I really like who I work with. I have a good, good coworkers, I have a good boss, and she's very supportive. And so I really like it. I like working with the students. I like showing them, I don't care. I like showing them anything they appreciate. So if it's the pro-con database, love it. Of course, I don't do it 100 times a day. It's probably, every once in a while. If I show them PubMed, if I, show them Mendeley, which is a citation management software, it's always, I was like, yes, okay. They see it, they understand it. And in fact, one thing I notice is a lot of times students will graduate and go, oh, I wish I'd used Interlibrary Loan more when I was a student, or I wish I had, done the databases more when I was a student, because suddenly they don't have access to it once they've graduated. And I like the variety in what I do. And I actually don't hate working from home. I actually kind of like it. So that's kind of it's kind of an interesting experience. What do I hate about, kind of along, I actually have two things I can mention, kind of along the lines of what James said. I think ebooks, because we will get, people are used to just thinking everything's also available in ebook, or they'll go on Amazon and say, hey, this is available in ebook. Why can't the library buy it in ebook form? What they don't realize is that what is available for, your individual person to purchase to your Kindle or your download to your Overdrive account is very different from what libraries can do. And I think it all kind of goes underneath budget for me, because to buy an ebook, it's not only buying the ebook, which is always so much more expensive than what they can even possibly imagine. And then you're buying possibly one, like 500. We have a book that's $500 for one concurrent user. I mean, and it's a book that's used quite a bit that we did get in ebook form. But what they don't realize is that side effect of we also have to buy the platform it's on. And not all platforms have the same ebook. So it's not like I can say, we're going to get this platform, and then I can get all the ebooks I want. No, if we want this ebook, you have to have this platform. If you want this other ebook, we might have to have this other platform. Or you can buy an ebook individually and put it on a Kindle, but you can't buy it for a library. Like, it's just not available for a library. And so that's kind of the frustration, because we'll get people asking about videos too. Same thing. Like, you can't just buy the video like you buy a DVD. No, you have to buy a subscription to this streaming service that's maybe educational and may have the movie, but you're paying, $1,000 just to have basically access to this one movie. And unless there's a massive push that everybody in the institution is going to be using that streaming service, that platform, it's not worth it really to buy it for one, instructor who decides they want to show this one documentary that's on, let's say, one of the streaming services. I'm blanking right now, not Netflix, but the ones that you can get for educational purposes. So I think that's kind of the big thing, is kind of like budget. People don't realize they understand, they think they can look up what it costs on Amazon. They don't realize what the actual real cost is. And that's different, because when you buy a book, you still can buy a book for, a physical copy of the book for about the same price as what you buy as an individual. You can't do that with electronic device. Ebooks or streaming movies. So, and we're a small school. So I'll go to like presentations and they will mention things like, oh, we have, Camtasia, or we have choose between Camtasia or Articulate to do these videos. I'm like, we have one computer in our school with Camtasia on it that we can edit on, but that's literally it. So, I mean, maybe our instructional designer might have more, but it's not like we have like an institutional subscription to this type of video editing service, or we don't have an institutional subscription to a lot of things that a lot of other libraries do have. So like Grammarly or Turnitin. We always get asked about Turnitin. And like, that's a lot of money for a library our size to get a subscription to Turnitin. So those are things that I think kind of frustrate me about working in a small library, because, you know, even the, you know, do instruction on a dime, and I'll go to them and it's from somebody from the University of Minnesota, and their instruction on a dime is something I don't even have that dime.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to jump in. I had some things I forgot to mention, but what you two said about the hate thing, both the video and the e-readers, since COVID started, I feel like I've had to be the bearer of bad news so much more in this position than I had to in the past. Just for exactly what you two are saying, is that every platform, it's just the cost is so different and they don't get why we can't have everything, or the frustrations of going to a presentation like you're mentioning about my budget compared to even a medium-sized school is not realistic. But I did forget the one other thing that I love about this job that I wanted to mention, because it's specific for this group or this panel, I guess, is I love the small size, because when it's graduation time, I do know all the students at graduation and things like that. Like, students come in and you know them by first names. And when I worked at a bigger institution, you know, you might know your student workers and one or two other people who are there regularly, but you know, you walk down the hallways and it's like, oh, hi, Marcus. And, you know, I can associate a name with a face. And that's just something, like I said, most of my career was spent at bigger schools and I never had that experience. And it was just something that, it was a pleasant surprise to me that I didn't think I'd appreciate as much as I do. Especially when I'm getting people mad at me because I can't buy every video and every ebook that exists out there. So at least students know who I am, though.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with faculty. I think you know, if you're a bigger school, you don't always know all the faculty, maybe the people you liaise with, but not all of them. Whereas where I am right now, I do feel like I have a really close connection to faculty. Like, I can reach out to them, and I get to be on committees with them, all sorts of committees. So that's why I get to know them, and I get to know what they're doing too, because
that's a great point. Yeah.
And they'll think, oh, we need to have, you know, 5 people on this committee. Let's ask one of the librarians. And I'm like, okay, so you're starting this new class. Great. Let me, you know, how can I help?
And that's how I've gotten into, we didn't do a lot of reference and instruction, I think, before I came. And it's exactly what you're saying, is because I got to develop those relationships with those people, and the amount of faculty who've been, oh, I didn't know a library could do that, or, oh, this is an option. And at a bigger school, I just think it's easier to get kind of lost in the shuffle or focused on one very specific thing where, you know, you just won't make those connections or have those conversations.
All right. So now that we've touched on your jobs a little more in detail, let's talk about the pandemic. Tell me how this has changed your world. I know it has. In what ways? And how do you see that impacting the future? Are some of these changes going to stick, or is it all going to go back to the way it was before? All right, let's go with Krista.
So obviously I think I mentioned this maybe before everybody else got on, but I've been working from home for pretty much since March of last year. So almost a year now. For the first couple of months we were closed, and then people would come in the summer just for their labs. And then now in the fall, the library opened kind of shorter hours, and we were allowed to bring back some staff who had been furloughed during the times that we were closed. So they basically staffed the library with one student worker there as well. We try to limit how many people are actually, you know, in the library. And I'm doing all my reference interviews and workshops from my home and virtually. And I think some of the, like I mentioned, kind of spoiler alert, I kind of like working from home because the commute is gone. So something I can just get up and get to work right away. And one thing I think I might keep, I don't know about reference. I mean, I do have some students who really want to see somebody in person and to go over things. And right now I'm kind of working with a student. I'm trying to push back on, if we need to get together and be the same, you know, 6-foot office. I'm like, well, let's see what we can do, you know, virtually. And I think some students are kind of having a tough time adjusting to that virtual, you know, meeting. But I think things that will change are like the workshops I do. I think I've had more attendance to my virtual workshops than I have to the in-person workshops. So when I do like advanced searching or Mendeley or, you know, introduction to the library, I have people who actually come to them because I can send out an invite and be like, hey, don't forget this meeting. They can just log in from wherever they are and then come to the meeting online. Whereas if they're not at school, they can't come to the workshop on the day of, or they can, but they're unlikely to come in just for the workshop on the days that I offer them. I think that's going to stay. I think some of the electronic resources we added will probably stay. And I don't know, I think our school is actually looking into what it will look like post-pandemic. And we, our senior leadership has sent out an email saying what kind of things do you want to keep? What kind of things don't you want to keep? And so I think virtual meetings are one thing that might stay, just because people get more flexibility than to work from home or work on campus. And so I think that's all I can have for that.
That's great. Thank you. James.
Yeah, I think our experience is really similar to Krista's. In terms of library operations, it's very similar. We're mostly closed, sort of open, don't come in kind of thing. I think some of the things that, or few of the things that we've developed, we have a virtual reference appointment system now, so you can, make an appointment, meet with us online. We've always had a chat service that's 24/7. We're part of a co-op for that. That's still there, and I can't say that students are using it more, but they're using this other system that we developed, which is just us, this virtual reference appointments. So that's there. And then for instruction, we're doing a lot more, obviously, online stuff. So some of the librarians are making videos that are tailored to a certain class, or they're making, instead of doing subject libguides, which we've had for a while, they're doing course-specific ones. Really tailoring those things to different assignments, I think. I haven't personally done any of that. My classes are still in person, so I have to teach with a mask on, which really is terrible. I hate that, but it's been okay. So that'll be nice if that goes back to normal. I think some of the other stuff in terms of collections, I think that we're finally at a point, we've got some, I would say, more old-fashioned type librarians where I work, who are pretty wedded to print collections. And I think I've finally sort of broken them down that, hey, we really need to keep pushing electronic stuff and get away from print, and get, it's a little bit of legwork at first, but to set up demand-driven acquisition programs or evidence-based acquisition programs, which are two different but sort of similar things, just to get more content into our catalog and then figure out how to pay for it afterwards, electronic content. So I think that's going to stay. I think that's the trend out there, is to go more and more electronic. But at the same time, trying to figure out what do we do with all the legacy services and staff who are kind of dedicated to those legacy type things. That's a real challenge. That's going to be out there.
Wonderful. And Marcus.
So we're a little different. We opened back up to students in August. Well, at the end of August, last week of August, first week of September, somewhere in there. Me and the other librarian, the other full-time person, we alternate days that we're here. And then we have one student worker who I mentioned earlier, told me today he's leaving. So we'll have to figure out what we're going to do with that next, who helps us kind of man the front desk and things like that. We have been open, but I felt comfortable with it because of the size of our school. It's still, we have maybe, we'll have 5 kids in the library at any given time, and sometimes less, it's been pretty quiet, but it has focused, kind of touching what both of you have already said. We've had to switch more to online instruction and build up some of our e-resources. And I think those e-resources are going to stay, which is good. It's something that we've had to develop. When we come back, though, I will say I'm kind of surprised. I've been putting together the e-videos and seminars and things like that, and it goes okay. And people are attending, but it just seems to me that the questions I'm getting back from students when I was actually in person with them, I don't know. I don't know if they don't have the sound on, but even like our database usage has actually gone down a little bit, which has surprised me. I thought it would go up. I think it's because they're not here getting the regular reinforcement from their teachers and from me being there. But that was one thing, you know, a few like our streaming video services have gone way up, but all of our other databases have gone down from what we've had. And I think that was a surprise to me. So that wasn't, you know, part of that is, you know, maybe my teaching, but I think with our students, it did show me that when we are going to have, like I said, too, fully distance learning programs, I'm really going to have to look at what I'm going to do with those to make sure that students are staying engaged and still using the e-resources. So I think, which is good, our e-resource budget has gone up a little bit, whereas other things have been cut. But when we open back up, I'm excited to go back into classrooms again, but use the e-resource, like the videos and things like that. I think they're going to be great supplemental material because yes, I'll go in and talk to students, but now when I leave, I can say, and here's a video of, you know, kind of describing what I've already gone over with you. So please reference that or ask me questions. So I think it's helped me develop skills, but I'm looking forward to having students back here. And whenever we can safely fully open, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark, because that's something I want to have mentioned too. I did statistics for ACRL or ARL, yeah, ACRL recently, and we know, like I was specifically looking at the journal usage, and it was just stunning to me how, you know, you'd have so many hits, and then it just plummeted in March.
Yeah.
And it kind of stayed low and compared to the, now I haven't compared year to year, it was just basically that was 12 months, but it significantly dropped from August. And I don't know if it's still that way or if it maybe picked up in fall, but that you'd think the e-usage would go up with databases, with articles, and it hasn't. And I think one thing I think is because students, like when they're on campus and they do a search, and they find an article they want to see, they just click on it, it goes to the page, and the IP address, the IP is registered, and it's like, okay, Northwestern Health Sciences University, there is a, you know, a check mark for usage. Whereas if they're at home, there's a little more, they have to authenticate their usage, either go through our eJournal Finder or go through a database or do something to sort of log in and access the full text of the article or an article. And they feel comfortable doing that, especially if they're not if they don't have a specific assignment asking them to do that. So it's good that you mentioned that, because I saw like that's exactly something that we noticed as well, or at least I did.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better. That makes me feel better that I'm not the only one who had that experience then this spring, summer.
Yeah. And I think ours did too. Yeah. I was going to say ours declined too in the spring. I don't know about the fall, but I think part of it was our instructors got the sense when they had to transition to online was to maybe set the bar a little bit lower, you know, so that could be playing into, at least for us, I don't know. I'm not sure how else to explain it. It's odd.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's because, I mean, a lot of our programs don't always require like research papers or research assignments, so they have to, you know, do the research and then, you know, cite articles and things like that. Not a lot of our programs have, they may have one or two classes like that, but since it's mostly hands-on, it's not something they have to do all the time. And maybe since, you know, if they're not on campus, they're not just doing their own little research or looking at their own articles for whatever reason. And the interesting thing about, you talk about print materials, our students are very, very married to print. So that's kind of an interesting, you know, struggle we're going to have going back is, do we stick with electronic resources, even though they're so much more expensive, or are we going to, you know, still kind of focus on print because they might, you know, they just like print books for whatever reason. It's just what they like to do. So.
Great. And Elizabeth said in the chat, not to forget the fact that students are also probably may not be able to print from home, which could decrease their looking at journals, knowing if they can't print it out. Who wants to read that tiny little font on a computer screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of piggybacking on the last question about the pandemic, talk to us about the future little bit of fortune telling here, for your organization or your job in the library world. Anything that you see big changes coming or big changes not coming, whatever it is that you see in the library landscape ahead. Okay. James.
Well, I think maybe it's not ahead, it's already here. I think for a lot of state institutions, whether it's in Minnesota or elsewhere, you know, most of our budget comes from enrollment, comes from tuition. You know, there's state support, but state support is pretty static or declining. And I think that libraries are kind of low-hanging fruit for institutions. You know, it's a good place to look for budget savings. I think that's going to be with us for quite a while. You know, declining enrollment is just, there was declining enrollment before the pandemic. There just aren't as many 18-year-olds out there, I guess, as there used to be. So that's going to be here. I think the other point I was making was that as we shift to more and more electronic, how many people do you actually need to be doing that? You know, you need people to kind of license stuff and get it into the catalog and make it discoverable. But do we need the footprint that we used to have in terms of staff who are, you know, in the old days managing big print collections and all that was involved in that? You know, where do we go from there? You know, how do you take the people who had been doing that and give them new skills and try to get them into that electronic world? And, you know, what kinds of things can they do? I mean, we're really struggling with that, trying to figure out we've got 5 staff who, you know, need more things to do, but where does their jobs, you know, begin and where does ours end? You know, how do you kind of keep them separate? It's really difficult. So that sounds very downbeat, I guess. Hopefully somebody else will bring it back up.
I'm sure we did actually get a question in the chat, which I'm going to stay with you for a second, James.
Okay.
Have the faculty at Century been exploring OER?
Oh yeah, yep. So we were one of the few institutions in the state to receive one of the grants that the state legislature actually set aside money for kind of exploration of not OER specifically, but what's called a Z degree or a zero cost textbook degree. So you could go through a program without incurring any textbook costs. Maybe there'd be lab fees and stuff, but so what that means is either faculty adopting OER materials for their courses or using library materials. I mean, they can use stuff in our databases and things like that, but trying to reconfigure their courses to not use a textbook that people have to pay for. So our faculty are really big on it. We now have all the courses we need to offer the Z degree, and which leads to an associate in arts at Century. And I think most of those faculty are using OER textbooks. And the library actually has a piece of that money to support one of the librarians doing that, I think on a half-time basis. Half of her job is doing OER stuff. And then all of us are involved. Like, you know, I alluded to earlier, I was doing something today for nursing faculty, trying to identify textbooks that she could use in place of ones that students normally buy. So lots of OER stuff. Yeah.
Great. Krista, you want to take the OER question? Have your faculty?
Sure. Yeah, we're such a niche. The programs we have at our school are so niche and specific that there isn't. There's some open education resources that we found and we've provided to our faculty, but so much of what, like there aren't a ton of chiropractic books written in the open education resource space. So we've kind of been trying to encourage our faculty to do something like that, to start creating materials that can be just, you know, open access and Creative Commons licensed. But so far that hasn't happened. So we try, we'll look, but it really hasn't been adapted much by faculty, just for logistics. We try to find, for our general education courses, we try to find things, but like I said, it's just we're just too, the programs we have aren't as ubiquitous as some like your general chemistry books, for instance.
Great. Marcus.
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. James, we had faculty, they wanted us to apply for that grant for the Z degree thing. And unfortunately, since we are a private institution, we weren't eligible for that particular grant, but it is one of the most popular requests that we get. But also, Krista, like you were saying, I was working with an instructor. We have a construction management program, and there's management books, but there's nothing that really blends those two worlds together. So it's an area we're looking into and exploring. It's definitely on my list because it's such a common request from instructors. This spring and summer, I'm hopefully going to be developing, some type of LibGuide or something that is a bank for them to go to for at least their general classes to find more of these things. But just similar to what Krista said, is so many of our programs are so specialized that, yeah, we think for their general ed, it's an option. And then some of our other programs, like we found some decent things for architecture and interior design, but not many of our other ones. But I think it's definitely a growing field, and that's somewhere I was going to talk about it in my response actually to your original question. I do see one of the, I work at Chippewa Valley Technical College. I know they've really embraced it there in Wisconsin, and I just see a lot of institutions going that way in the future.
Great. Well, why don't I stay with you, Marcus, and you can tell me your answer to my original question.
Okay. Well, part of it was going to be OER, so I'm really glad that Maggie brought that up. But the second thing is that it just definitely is going to be more of a hybrid model in one way or another, with online resources and physical things in person. I've mentioned we're having, before this happened, Dunwoody, we really didn't offer any online classes. Like I think we had one or two that were available to students before COVID. And then obviously in the last year, we've all rushed to put together the best things that we can. And I just think there's no totally going back from that. So for instance, like I said, we're going to have 2 programs starting this fall that are completely online. And I see more and more, especially our general ed, like the general ed equivalents, our English classes, our science classes, I think more of those are going to be going online. And the library, we're going to have to find a way to embrace that and work with that. And kind of like I said, I felt good about some of the videos and things we put together, but then I've seen some of the, statistics for databases where I put together this great thing about how to use EBSCO. And I know when I've worked with the same class in person, our EBSCO numbers shot up and students were doing this project. But now when I was doing the video lecture or putting together these different components, our statistics aren't going up. And some of the questions a lot of the questions I'm getting, I never would have gotten in the past. Or why are you asking me how to get this Google article when we did the whole thing about why you shouldn't be using a Google article and things like that. But yeah, so OER, and just definitely going forward, it's going to be more of a hybrid model between online and in person. And we're going to have to grow with that. It's going to be an interesting challenge.
Thanks, Marcus. Krista?
And that's exactly, again, Marcus and I have very, very similar schools, because I would say we had one program that was mostly online, but we were not, again, most of our courses were in person. And now that everybody's been forced to do an online thing, I know the school has, always wanted to go forward and get accredited for online programs. And this sort of really was the major push to do that. And because our president and the academic, the president is from Capella. She worked at Capella before. So she has a lot of experience in online education. I know she wanted to go there. It's always been kind of a struggle because, again, budget and just resources as far as, compared to what we had to put our money towards versus what, Capella put their money towards the infrastructure. But we've had to do it. And I think I noticed, as I mentioned, I'm on a curriculum committee, a lot of the course changes we get are people want to move their courses to a hybrid course model forever. So not just throughout the pandemic, but, for good. And I think a lot of faculty, I think some faculty just can't wait to get back to school and back to work on campus, and others are like, I don't mind doing this. And they've already put so much effort into like those crazy first months of the pandemic where they had to suddenly move everything to online and they were just completely unprepared. And now that they had almost a year of it, they're like, oh, this isn't so bad. Now I've got the handle on it. So I feel good. Like the library, I think the library world is pretty like being able to offer services online is pretty well equipped to do that. I mean, even like I do a newsletter and I sent it out to all students during this pandemic. Like, here's how you access all the stuff, related to the library. And one thing I say is, everything that you do in the library, for the most part, you can do from home other than study, because everything we offer is from, like, our databases are offered through computers, our websites online, library loan requests are done through computers, like everything is done usually in some form of electronic way. Whereas, we still have print books and we do curbside pickup, but most of what most students need would be done electronically. So that's, I think, something that's going to stay, and that's something we're going to have to, I think we have to get a little more sophisticated with it, because for the longest time you could be like, yeah, we have a chat service and yeah, we have some videos, but for the most part, students were on campus. So that's how we did most of our work. And I think we'll have to offer a little bit more electronically. But again, I think the same thing with Marcus, that doesn't necessarily mean how do we get students to use that stuff? And I think some of that will also be faculty kind of pushing it. Because I think with anything, if the faculty say you must use this, students will do it. If they don't, then it's, even I could stand there and like do cartwheels and they still might be like, oh yeah, whatever, whatever my professor will take. Yeah, as the future goes, I think that's a good question. I think I think we're gonna have students on campus. That's just the way it's gonna be. But as far as like the talent level of the staff we have and their skills, like how can we, some people are going to be able to adapt to this new online hybrid thing very easily. And then I have other staff members who really are customer service in-person driven. And so trying to coach them into being more technologically savvy. Do they want to be technologically savvy? I think there are people who be like, yeah, I want to learn that. And then they learn it, but do they employ it? Do they use it? So I think that's the challenges we're going to face, is to not only just know about it, but to actually embrace some of the changes that are coming in the library world and the world of education.
Great, Krista, thank you. We only have a few minutes left. So I just want to say to our attendees, if you have a question that is just burning in the back of your mind and you need to know, now is the time to put it in the chat or the Q&A before we sign off. And for my panelists, I'm going to actually just open it up. And if there's anything, I know we did not get through all of the questions that I sent you. So if there's anything that you just you feel the need to share, you have to tell us the story or anything we didn't cover, now is the time. And I'll let you go ahead and do that as you think of something.
One thing I was just thinking about when you were asking as far as like other specializations or skills that you could have, I just kind of want to remind people that everybody has something kind of unique, and to find the right library for that, because some things you wouldn't think would matter could. My example is just really came out to me. We had an intern from MCTC's library program, and he actually grew up, his dad was a welder and he was a that was just like his part-time job. And we have a welding program. And he just came in and kind of this technical lingo, he had these conversations with both the professor, instructor, and his class that I never could have had. And he would have just been such a great fit. And, he's looking for jobs. And even he's just said, until he worked here, they just kind of assigned him a place, I think. But him having that background just perfectly matched with what, we're trying to do and the unique programs that we have here. So I maybe it's just keeping a record of it, but it's just, you never know what is going to help. And to a certain lesser extent, my thing in Hawaii, they wanted somebody who was both a teacher and had the library degree and had experience working with diverse populations. And so where I'd done the ESL teaching, I never thought that would really help me get a library job, but it did. So it might not be a specific certificate, but whatever unique experiences you do have, find a way to promote that, I guess. And sometimes it's hard to find, but there are some really good fits out there that people don't even realize what you've done in the past will help you out with.
I was told I got this job because I was a teacher. You know, it wasn't just one class, you know, in library school. It was, you know, full education program. And so they kind of figured, oh, she's going to be comfortable in front of a class and talking in front of people, which I am. And so that's, you know, that was something I think that just kind of put me over the other candidates for the position. So yeah, like you said, what Marcus said, you just never know what that one skill is. And so and when I hire a lot of people, you know, I as student workers, paraprofessional workers, and, you know, it's one thing to say, oh, I really like acupuncture, I really like chiropractic. And I think it's a good thing to sort of not talk about what you like, but talk about what you do. And you know, it's, so I, you know, like I've always, like you can say, I've always been interested in education, but you can say, oh, you know, I've always been interested in education. My parents were teachers and I went and got this education degree and this is what I do. Or, you know, if you really like numbers or budgeting, talk about the things that you actually have done and like to do, because that really stands out when you say, oh yeah, I really like numbers. And I've always volunteered to do the, you know, be the treasurer for all the you know, committees I've joined or the professional organizations I've joined. Things like that. I mean, I don't know if that's really kind of what you want, but I mean, I think everybody wants to know how do I get a library job? And sometimes it's, you know, just saying this is what I've actually done. And even if it's not in the job description, I might stand up and be like, oh, that might be a good fit. And just also know that there's a lot of good competition out there. That's the trickiest part, I think, is in interviewing. Sometimes you just think, oh, all these candidates are great. Who am I going to choose?
Thanks, Krista. James, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, you know, it's almost like, you know, you've got to think of it as, it's almost like selling a house in a bad market, right? You've kind of got to work with you got a buyer on the hook. You got to work with that buyer to get, you know, try to sell your house. So you're in library school and you say, oh, I really want to be in an academic library. Well, it might not happen, but just because, you know, the job you can get is in a public library, you can still do a lot of those things that you were intending to do in the academic library, in that public library environment. I mean, the nice thing about libraries is that they're sort of wide open. You know, there's nothing that says, oh, you've got to do, I mean, yeah, there's stuff we got to get done all day, but we all come up with our own projects and things that we think, you know, that we like personally and that we want to see happen at that institution. And it, you know, just because you found yourself in a place that you didn't think you were kind of gearing up for, you know, it's not the end of the world. You know, you can get some really good skills in any first library that you get into, and those are going to be pretty transferable to other places. I mean, even though libraries all do their own thing, there's that general sense of what they do that carries. I mean, I've been in so many now. Publics and academics, they're really the same thing. The only thing that changes is how much money you have, where the money comes from, and the type of customer you have. Otherwise, they're kind of the same. So.
And if you get into a different kind of library, you might decide you really like it.
Yeah.
You might, or you could say, I like it now, and then get out later.
Well, that's right. Following James's path.
I mean, that kind of happened with me. I never wanted to work somewhere smaller. And I honestly, I can't imagine going back to one of the larger institutions where I worked at. It would, you know, it would be fine, but it's just not for me. And that was something surprising that I learned after working in both kinds.
And then you end up in managing people, which was something like suddenly I'm learning a lot about human resources, even though there's an HR place at where I am. You know, I'm always reading, like, ask a manager to read about, okay, what's a terrible boss do today? And that's, you know, or what should I not do? And so I try to kind of keep up with that kind of thing. And you just don't expect necessarily that skill. A management class, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then here I am managing people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the other thing too is, as far as, you know, the skills, again, like your hobbies. I mean, I'll be honest with you. We had is it done or are people still around?
There are still people in here, but it is still one. So.
Go into this thing, but like for instance, we had somebody who did video editing. He did it as a hobby, and when we had him working at our school, we used him so much because we made advertisements for the library and the writing lab. And again, it's the kind of thing that, it's a little thing that kind of put him over the top. It wasn't necessarily in the job description, but when I was looking at all the people who had, similar skills and similar experience, that was one thing I was like, oh, that would be nice to have and to use and to fun projects. So yeah, again, sell yourself with the little things, little nooks and corners that that aren't necessarily pictured.
Thank you so much, Krista. To all of our panelists, thank you. You guys were fantastic. I really, really enjoyed listening to you all. Small academic libraries for the win. Clearly, this is amazing. Thank you to all of our attendees for showing up today. On the screen, you do see our upcoming dates and in the series, and also the link to the evaluation, though I will, as always, be sending that out to you all tomorrow. So once again, I say thank you for participating, and I hope that you'll come back and attend again. For our panelists as well, you're welcome anytime. So thank you so much.
Medical
Thank you.
libraries, and they come next
Thank
week.
Yeah,
Yes,
come
you
next
could.
week. Exactly. Next time. Medical libraries.
Yeah, a little different than the hospital or
Exactly.
yeah.